is. Good evening. Welcome to our first budget workshop. We're going to go ahead and get started.
Do you have me ready? Okay.
Is your presentation? I didn't know it was you. I'm sorry.
It's okay. That's, nope.
Wrong one.
Yeah, next one. Thank you.
That one.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. As Jeff said, it's our first budget session of the year, and I'm so grateful and happy to have Mike Vespi here in person. We're so glad that you're here. I know it's no small feat to have come back and, in addition to being here tonight, spent the last 2 days in Albany, so getting the full breadth of New York State winter weather. So welcome back. We're so glad that you're here. And of course, Nancy Wayman as well. Welcome back. So good to see you. Tonight, a lot of the work that you're going to see is due to the work that's been happening over the last several years with Mike's prudent long-range financial planning. When we initially looked at this year, 4 years ago, we were in a much worse scenario. And the reason that that has closed has been through the work that Mike and those in his office have done. And to that end, I just want to thank Terry Hassler, who's here tonight, and Rachel Smith. There's been a lot of movement happening in the business office, and their ability to be flexible and be boots on the ground and helping to support departments as they work through the budget process that we're going to see over the next few meetings, but also just the day-to-day operations has been significant, and just their clear communication and their collaboration with each other and support for the department has been huge. So thank you both so much for everything that you've done. So tonight we're going to get started with talking about our budget guidelines. So I will walk through those with you, and then Mr. Vespi is going to take us through just our major components of revenue, our executive budget overview, and when we start to look at state aid and throughout both our presentations, you'll hear us mentioning advocacy. So we actually just had our advocacy team meet this afternoon and just talking about how to continue to work with our local legislators to promote and advocate for fair foundation aid funding from New York State. So we'll continue to be sharing that message and sharing more details of that this evening. So the board, of course, has seen the budget guidelines and approved them earlier this year, so I won't be reading them to you, but wanted to just again highlight that this is a collaborative process. So through our district planning team, we look annually at the budget guidelines, and particularly in challenging budget years, as we've been facing and we know we'll continue to face, the budget guidelines really help give us clarity and consistency in how we're making decisions, and they help us give some direction, some guardrails, so that we can be sure that the money and the resources that we're allocating are not only using towards our educational priorities, but also our fiscal responsibility. So they become more and more important the more challenging years that we're facing. So this first slide here talks about having a student-based budget. And when I look at things like having rigorous and equitable and authentic curriculum, for us that really means making sure that we have consistency across our programs, making sure that we're being efficient in our resources, and that can be really difficult when we have 9 buildings. So when you look at having 5 elementary buildings and helping to ensure that there's a consistent approach, that's really important, and the work that Heather Clayton has been doing to help highlight our needs in our multi-tiered system of support has been significant. So an example of this would be our Amplify Math program. So for the first time, to have one math program that we're using in all of our elementary schools is educationally sound, it's equitable for our students, it's making sure that all students have access to rigor and to data-driven processes, to assessments and strategies and resources that support them individually. It also is really important financially and aligns with our budget guidelines. So when we talk about having one resource that we're using, that's going to mean that we can really promote professional learning for that one resource. We're not bringing 6 or 7 different resources in across different buildings, different manipulatives, different training. So that's how some of those decisions also come out within our budget, and how we can help make those decisions in a way that really shows up in the curriculum within our classrooms. And another example I would just give of this is from the SEL side, and looking at habits of mind, which is something I know you've heard of over the last couple years, and we'll be hearing a lot more about in the next few years. But from a social emotional learning standpoint, it can be really difficult when you have different buildings across different levels to have consistent language for students. And when we want to have an impact over time, we need to be using similar language. Kids need to understand what their expectations are, and the expectations shouldn't be different based on what teacher they have or what building they attend. And so the work that Dr. Ali has done to help bring habits of mind to our district SEL committee and to several of our elementary schools, and now bringing that training up into our secondary schools, has been huge. It helps make sure that we're being financially responsible with our resources, especially since this is a free framework that we use. And we can really focus our training and our professional learning in a way that's not splitting hairs and then trying to bring in lots of different resources or different authors to be able to come in. When we focus on our professional development, I know we've talked about that a little bit tonight, and the more consistent we can be in our approaches within the classroom, the more high-level professional learning we can bring in. And I would say this is one of the areas that's really something that we do so well here in Pittsford, because we have one of the most robust teacher centers in the area. And so being able to really highlight having our own highly qualified staff, our teachers leading training for each other, is something we take a lot of pride in. And that's really the bread and butter of our teacher center. So all summer when people are in and out of here, and we have thousands of people coming in, or thousands of hours of professional learning happening, that's our own homegrown professional learning that aligns with all of our standards. Just a little highlight for our Teacher Center Director, Nicole Berry. She was recently just awarded a fellowship for Women in AI Leadership. So she is going to be helping us lead the way in our AI learning across the state, and she's going to be representing us really well with that work. And speaking of that work, something that we really do here well that aligns with our budget guidelines is making sure that we're all moving in the same direction when it comes to professional learning. So when we do things like superintendent's conference days, we don't have 9 different superintendent's conference days happening. So we work with building leaders, with our central office team, to develop a program that everyone is going to stop and do at the same time. So that way we know everybody has the same foundational information, and we're using our time really efficiently. So for example, as you know, earlier this year, we talked about artificial intelligence, and we were able to bring our guidelines to all staff. So now everybody understands, here's great ways you could use it in the classroom, here's ways to never use it, here's ways that we can actually use artificial intelligence to deepen cognition for students within the classroom, and make sure that everybody has that same basic understanding. So one of the big things that we're going to be talking about now, and decisions that we've had to make, is really balancing the investment that we're making each day in our schools with maintaining responsibility when we have limited resources. So for us, we're trying to maintain innovation, knowing that we're not only needing to remain budget neutral, but we actually need to reduce our budget. And that can be really challenging, and it's causing us to do a lot of creative thinking, which has been good, and it's been important for us to do. So our advocacy team, as I said, is meeting again to talk about what are the ways we can continue to promote the work that our local legislators have done, to be able to share the story of our budget across for higher-ups to see in the governor's office, and to really educate and engage our community so that they understand. I think we all agree that the people who live here in Pittsford are taxpayers. Many of them move here to benefit from our great education system, and they already make a significant contribution to our schools. And so our answer is not to go beyond their tax cap, but to look to the state to say, what else can you be doing to make sure that we're getting our fair share of foundation aid? And in addition to that, it's just been important that we partner. So our partnership with PTSA has been so strong. I know every board meeting we have different donations that are made from PTSA to specific classrooms, to programs, our visiting authors, special events at schools. So those are things that we do not take for granted. And in many cases, especially in years like we've had recently, we wouldn't be able to have those events without our partners at PTSA. And our other partner that I just would want to mention is our Pittsford Education Foundation. So partnering with them from everything from flexible resources we can use immediately, like AP course fees for students who have a financial need to make sure that they have access to that level of rigor. But also we've been talking about curricular resources, some that are much more expensive, $60,000 or more, and they've been able to raise funds to be able to put toward some of those curricular resources so that we can bring in different screening tools or different AI tools that can help us bring strategies to our classrooms that we may not have been able to bring in otherwise. And then with the structures of running that through BOCES, we're able to take that one large donation and have it really work for our students year over year, minimizing the impact on our budget. The other thing I would just mention is the great work that we've done, and again, this is in Mike's office, but our energy performance contract, to know that we have solar panels now on the roof at Mendon Center, which happened so quickly, and being able to move forward with things like composting in the backside of our kitchens now, and doing that in a way that we can really benefit from the aid that's coming back on that has been something that was so important to capitalize on. And that's something that has really come through that long-range planning. And finally, of course, we want to maintain our fiscal stability now, but we're more and more often looking toward the future because we know reductions that we make now are going to impact us exponentially over time. So I would just say we're so proud of our financial record. We have the highest bond rating because we have such careful savings and we have had prudent long-range planning. And we're appreciative that the governor right-sized us several years ago with foundation aid and made us whole again after many years, as we know, of millions of dollars of aid that we were missing out on. And so that was wonderful to see. We haven't seen that same level of support over the last few years. And so now, even though we know that we have some great local allies in Senator Brauch and Assemblymember Lunsford, we want to continue to ask the governor's office to help our local legislators bring the support that they need to our districts and reallocate some of the funds that have been placed elsewhere to get into the K-12 public education setting. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn over our timeline to Mr. Mike Busby.
I love when we do budget presentations and we talk about what's important, which, you know, are the curricular programs and the impact on students. That's really what the budget's all about. And then, unfortunately, it's required for me to get into the details behind how all that happens. But you're familiar with the budget process. We do anticipate a relatively on-time budget this year. Now, I'll say that based on my 2 days in Albany, and it'll probably, you know, get extended out. But it's actually been less of an issue because we have a pretty good, you know, idea of our revenue. But we are expecting that budget approval on April 1st. But I think the most important part about this slide is the budget process really occurs throughout the entire year. I mentioned earlier at our advocacy meeting that we know exactly what this budget looks like when we do the long-range plan update in September, right? So by the time we get here, we've already been looking at the budget for, you know, 6 or 7 months. You've heard me say this before. You know, we've got the tax levy and state aid as our two primary revenue sources. And, you know, I'll go through the significance of both of those sources tonight in the presentation. Tax levy accounts for about 69% of our revenue, and then the balance, the 22%, comes from obviously state aid. And the tax cap in general is still capped at the 2% level, despite the fact that inflation now for the 5th year in a row, and I'll show that graphic, has been higher than that amount. When I talked about that today in our legislative meetings, zero appetite to talk about the tax cap whatsoever. So really, it's just something that we're going to have to continue to manage. I keep these slides in just for reference. The biggest impact, you'll hear me say this at least 3 times tonight, the biggest impact is the debt service payments from the current capital project are coming due from a bonding standpoint. So there's a bunch of state aid that's not like publicized yet. It's actually in the executive budget. It's not publicized, and only because it's prospective building aid, right? So as we borrow money, we file final cost reports. Rachel is the primary person behind that process, and we work with our fiscal advisors to do that, and then we get prospective building aid. And I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of the executive budget proposal. But the biggest impact, and I was concerned about that level debt piece, that's the biggest impact that you're going to see, and I'll show that later as well. But it's good to have, kind of what's called the capital levy exclusion. It's good to have these here as reference, and that's really, what we try to manage. So again, these are all estimates, and this is still ongoing all the way to March 1st we submit. But really, until you approve the adopt a budget in April, there can be adjustments that are made to this. But here's the early indicators that you see. The rollover, the tax-based growth factor was a little lower, so that reflected a little less regional growth, and then there's going to start to be some changes with the payment in lieu of tax structure. But you can see at the bottom, the 2% tax cap is there, right? So it's 2%. The amount's actually higher. And you can see a huge jump up. See that huge jump from 8.3 million to 11.1 million? That's the huge jump up as the current capital project debt service payments increase. And then it's netted out with prospective building aid, right? So you can see that capital levy exclusion, we try to keep that consistent. So we're anticipating a 2.69% increase on the levy this year overall. And again, this is what I've talked about, and if there was ever a way to get some changes made, we would advocate for. This worked well when, CPI was 1.46%. We had to pay the lower of the two. But when it's been higher than the 2%, it's capped at the 2%. And we all know that the price of goods and services have gone up significantly. And this has been a mechanism that's eroded our budget. And I would argue the last 3 years, foundation aid is not keeping up as well. So we've got some unique pressures in terms of the tax cap factors. The chart that the comptroller puts out, it's just a nice graphical representation. You can see since 2022, 2%, and see the actual consumer price index factors much, much higher. So that erodes our purchasing power. I added the percentages at the top because it can get lost in terms of, well, what's our actual tax levy increase, right? Because the cap is one thing, it's 2%, but our actual tax levy, which is the actual amount that we can get from property tax that we actually levy, is 2.69%. It was a similar situation in 2025, and you can remember my first year in the district, it was 0.08, but we started at negative 2.5. And then we got the capital project approved and some financing, and we were able to make some adjustments there. So you can see our tax levy history. We've been pretty consistent in terms of the percentages. From a forecasting standpoint, I'm conservative, so we're a little low, right? 269 this year, and then 233 and 222 in the future. Those will be higher once we finalize the debt service schedule. I anticipate those to be in the 2.5% range, like you see in the out years of 29-30 and 30-31. When the voters vote in March on the capital projects, remember that's a separate pot of money. does not impact our general fund budget. And that's always difficult to communicate, when you have those votes so close, within each other. Has absolutely nothing, no impact on the general fund budget. It's a separate pot of money. The only thing that we need to do when we have a capital project is you kind of vote for it once, and then you vote for it again when the debt service, impacts the tax cap, and then the debt service kind of impacts that budget, right? So we really try to manage it, and that's how we're able to communicate that we're looking at like level debt. That gives us a consistency in terms of our tax cap forecast. So I just said all these things, but this is just a nice summary page. CPI is diminishing our purchasing power. Debt service is the absolute biggest factor that's impacting the tax cap this year. But we've managed it, we've planned for it, and we're in good shape. And obviously, we're going to comply and be below the limit. So now we'll get into the fun stuff that I just spent the last 2 days reviewing and going through. So state budget increased to $260 billion in all funds. Tax receipts are up. So when the governor's budget talks about reduced projected budget gaps down to $6 and $9 billion, reduced from 10 and 12.5 billion, that's a good sign, right? So we know there's going to be future gaps, but they're lower. And so there's a greater chance of negotiating power when the legislators come together and look at what their revenue projections are. Summary of school aid, $1.3 billion or 3.6%. And then when you added non-traditional funds, which this year was a substantial increase in pre-K funding, which is a whole separate topic, and the prospective building aid, it's 4.3%. What's misleading about that is everyone assumes, well, this is great. Pittsford did really well. They must have got like a 3.6% or a 4.3% increase in aid. And it's going to actually be much greater with our prospective building aid. But our foundation aid, we're capped at 1%. Again, you'll hear me talk more and more about this. And what I found this weekend is that 69% of school districts in New York State are capped at 1%. This isn't just a Pittsford problem. This is a statewide problem. This is a statewide impact based on the executive budget proposal. Okay. Universal pre-K, very interesting. Huge commitment, $10,000 increase per child. It's long been something that we've lobbied and asked for. What we have to clarify is some language that would suggest that in 28-29, it could be an unfunded and unforced mandate situation. So we're not going to get too excited about it. It's early in the budget process, but it is something to keep an eye out. So we're happy about the funding. We're cautiously optimistic about what are the rules that are going to come along with it in the future. The lunch and breakfast program, I just wanted to put that out there for information, that now there's a substantial increase statewide to fund this. It's a great program. It's been obviously widely accepted, but at a cost. What we never want to see is add costs to a program and then don't fund us at the foundation aid, right? We want to say the requirement is to fund public education first, and then if you have extra money, you can fund whatever else underneath it. So between pre-K and the lunch and breakfast program, great programs, but we need the support for our operating costs first and then fund, right? So that's kind of what our advocacy effort's going to be geared to. And then when you start something new, you don't anticipate the participation. So there's a $43 million shortfall in the current year budget. Again, the state has more than enough money to cover it, so not an issue, but this is why you go slow and methodical and plan these things. You just have to be careful not to rush in. So I think it was prudent that we went in at the elementary level, and now we're looking at the middle and high school level. And actually, you'll see something on the board agenda about that tonight. So overall, sorry for the small print, but here's the summary. You can see at the top, overall foundation aid at 2.96%. Keep an eye on transportation. It's 5.73%. They had anticipated about 1,200 EV buses, and there's about 300 statewide right now. But you're going to start to see that line item grow depending on what happens with the EV bus situation. And certainly, we'll talk at our next meeting in detail about our proposal. And then the largest increase you see is universal pre-K, a 40.5% increase in that funding. So really, I covered everything that's here. The one thing that we didn't talk about is we've got that solar project in the EPC, so I'm wondering if we'll get extra aid in addition, because the EPC project would be about 60% aid, unless we went out for voter authorization, which we didn't. We moved forward to get the federal grant, or the federal incentives, so it's a different topic. But I'm wondering if maybe there'll be something in there that allows us to get a higher aid for the solar project. So that'll be an ongoing discussion there. And then in the executive proposal, you get these two things. One is we always want to be able to pay prior year aid to districts, because if there was a mistake that was made or a form wasn't filed, the district shouldn't be held hostage in terms of those funds. That's in the executive budget proposal to say, nope, we're not going to pay that. And then governors always want to freeze the aid limit and their proposal, and everything changes in the next legislative run. So the legislator, they usually say no to that, reject it, and it's usually okay. But if that ever did get approved, then we'd be stuck with whatever the aid was in the first proposal. So what happened with foundation aid? The district received a 1% increase. I like this graphic. Again, easier to read on paper than probably here. But I like this graphic because you can see that our combined wealth ratio has increased. So the wealth, the property and income wealth continues to rebound in the district. And as a result, we're on a hold harmless or 1% minimum due in the district. And like I said, that applies to most folks. From an advocacy standpoint, that foundation aid amount, that's what we need to study. And that data that drove the formula is now 25 years old, right? So you're going to hear us talk about that from an advocacy standpoint. But this is good because it gives you a little more in-depth look at, hey, how does the foundation aid formula work? Our executive budget proposal, foundation aid's at 1%. And overall, it looks like a $713,000 decrease. But that BOCES aid figure always gets updated, so they don't have all the information, and this doesn't include the year-end money that we spend at BOCES. So I'll give you a better idea of what we expect there. And then if you see our building aid number at about 4.1 million, it's going to be closer to 7 million when I get there. All right, so this is a little easier to read and understand. This is in the memo that I provide to the superintendent and the board. This gives you an idea of, well, what's it say in the media? Notice this year, nothing for universal pre-K. They pulled all of that money back finally and put it somewhere else for districts that have those programs. So it's easier to understand when the media publishes this, as opposed to before they would publish the number of what we had. So you can see the actual percentages. Again, most important one is the 1%. And then we're going to talk about that building aid number. This is good news. Love to share good news in these presentations. So we underestimated the amount of state aid that we'll receive in the current year budget by about $1.2 million. So this is good news in the current year budget. This is money that we use to help replenish the reserves that we're using to balance the budget, reserves and fund balance. So it's positive that we've got to be a little cautious not to overestimate. And Terry and I have a lot of discussions about what we think we're going to get in these aid categories, and we go back and forth based on history. So we did a really good job, and you can see in BOCES, we estimated $3.8 million, and then when they looked at how much we actually spent in BOCES, significantly higher. So I always tell people, don't panic about the initial BOCES figure, but think about it. If the executive proposal actually froze the aid, that would be a huge problem for us because those numbers wouldn't be updated, right? And they get updated at mid-year and at the end of the year, right? I kept the foundation aid history, but I think by now we've gone through this plenty. We waited patiently from 2007, supposed to be fully funded in 5 years, and we were fully funded a lot later than that. We're supposed to be get about $215,000 or 1% in budgeted aid for 26-27. And here's our history, right? We were fully funded in 22-23, so we're excited about that. And then this is exactly what I talked about with our legislative leaders. Then this thing is completely stalled out. Now we're just kind of held at, like political, whatever the political battle is in terms of a percent allocation. This is where the foundation aid formula needs to be updated. The pieces and parts are good, but the base cost to educate a successful student needs to be updated. And then you wouldn't run into this problem. So now it just turns into a, what do we think, 1%, 2%, 3%? And if you look at, that's what we've had. No percent, negative money actually, then 2% last year, which we really didn't end up getting, and then the proposal this year is 1%. We can't have the state aid numbers in hands of politicians. We need a proven, formula-driven approach so that it's not political. I talked about our CWR. Every time our combined wealth ratio increases, our aid factors decrease. So a lot of times I'll hear comments like, hey, they're doing this work over at this district, why can't we have that? And it's like, well, take a look at what their aid ratio is compared to ours. And as we get wealthier, the state, the formula, because it hasn't been updated, the formula will say, you're getting wealthier, so you can afford to pay more, right? That used to work when there wasn't a tax cap, right? So that's the challenge in terms of our budget development. So you always have to keep an eye on that. And you can see when I first got to the district, we had roughly 75% in building aid. Then it went down to 72, held at 72, and just before the presentation last week, we had to drop it to 70.5 because it continued to drop because of the combined wealth ratio. So you can see how our wealth factors impact the formulas. This is a very early revenue forecast. We're looking at about a $176 million budget, a $7.9 million increase, and we try to keep our increases at 4% or below. But the largest increase in the budget you see is state sources. So you say, well, Mike, we're only getting a 1% increase in foundation aid. Why is the overall state source amount 10%? That's that building aid that we're expecting. We're going to budget more for debt service, and then the state's going to reimburse us for that debt service. So without that increase in debt service, we'd be well below a 4% increase. So we just want to emphasize that throughout the budget process. Again, this is an early revenue forecast. As we move through as Terry refines the budget for the expenses, we'll be able to explain that. When we work with Nancy this year, in terms of the communications, we'll highlight that because, we'll get questions about that. Again, separate bucket that doesn't impact the budget overall because of the aid and the expense. So what are we looking at in terms of a budget-to-budget situation? I've never provided this guidance this early, but I thought it would be prudent. Our budget-to-budget amount in foundation aid would only be a 0.41% increase because we had expected more foundation aid last year when we set the budget. And then you see the big increases in building aid. We're expecting about $2.8 million more. And we've had 2 high-level meetings, and we're going to get a memo in place where we keep a constant eye on this throughout the upcoming year because it's contingent upon when construction gets done in the current projects, when forms get submitted, an early aid start. There's a lot of moving parts to this piece of it. And what happened is the state went away from just giving that money prospectively because so many districts weren't filing final cost reports. And then when they did and they reconciled, then the state was taking back a lot of money because what the assumed factors didn't come true. So they went to this model where you have to prove that you spent it, you file the form, and then you get the money. We're expecting, based on our conversations with our fiscal advisors, an additional $2.8 million in building aid in the upcoming year, but that's not reflected anywhere right now. So it's really critical, again, in the upcoming year that we stay on top of that. Next steps of the budget process, finalize the tax cap, right? That portion that I just talked about. Make sure we're laser focused on building aid. so that we have that. We've got to evaluate staffing and retirements. That's a moving target every day, and I know Sean's been super busy looking at that information. We've got to evaluate our BOCES services. BOCES services got impacted by the health increase. Remember, that was our situation last year. They're a year lag, so now they've got to update their program fees. So our BOCES, we've got to take a deep dive in our BOCES budget, and we're working on that. And then, of course, I mentioned a plan to purchase 2 EV buses. More information next time on that. So here's our upcoming meetings. We're excited about, the process. This is Budget Workshop 1, and, we'll follow up with Budget Workshop 2 with the individual budgets, and then Budget Workshop 3 where we bring everything together. So we'll have lots of feedback throughout that process. Questions? Yeah.
Just wondering from an advocacy standpoint if you've heard anything recently about the prior year claims.
Yeah. So we talked about that. They're in a good financial position. It's just, I think, the advocacy efforts through New York State ASBO and through NISCUS, and I think, Monroe County School Boards, we just need to push it. The money is there, it's available. And what we talked about is how lightning fast they take money back and withhold it. Terry and Rachel get those notices. But then if we try to, fire a prior year claim, then we're put on a waiting list. So I think you always strike like when the money's there. I think the money's there. I think there needs to be a bigger push legislatively to go after that. So that's a great question. And our biggest advocacy approach that we're working on that we just discussed is really exactly the things that I highlighted in terms of foundation aid. That's our big focus, right? We need updated data, and we're not supposed to ask for a number, but we know that roughly $180 million would bring all the districts, the 471 districts that are on the 1%, it would bring them to 3%. So when you look at the state's fiscal situation, it's not a big ask. A staffer said that. So I can only say that because a staffer said that. I could never say that first because that's still a lot of money, right? Any other questions?
I had a question on the lunch program. So you said in here it was a total of $395 million, which was allocated, but it was a shortfall of $43 million. Does that mean basically all of the schools across, and this is state level?
It's statewide,
Yeah.
and that's all in now, yeah.
So the cost was actually like $450 million roughly.
No, that number I think now includes the adjustment.
Oh, okay. So that
Yeah.
395 includes
Yeah,
the
that
adjustment.
includes the total proposal for this year. That's a great clarifying question.
And
yeah.
what does that mean for then future years? Like, do we think the state will continue to budget more for that, or should we continue to be
You have to
conservative?
operate within the reimbursement parameters that you have. Otherwise, you have to subsidize with general fund budget.
Right.
So we have to keep an eye on it. But those are set rates for federal and state reimbursement.
For 26, 27.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah,
we know,
and actually, Rachel and I have been talking about doing a separate, because it's a first-year program and we're looking at going into the middle high school, doing a separate report to be a little more transparent on that process in terms of participation is through the roof, right, which is great, but then how are we doing in terms of profit and loss? And during the federal shutdown, I asked those questions from afar. We didn't know, and we're now just getting to the point where Rachel's able to put together a little more detailed information on a P&L so that we can analyze that.
which then would influence our decision to like do a broader rollout.
100%.
Yeah.
That has to be looked at before those decisions are made.
Yeah.
And again, there's some information later in the board meeting that's going to help us look at the equipment that we need to be successful. And we need help kind of determining what that equipment is. So great fiscal question there. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mike. I was wondering if you would just take a moment and just share about the Cash Fest Award that the district received and the exceptional work of one of our colleagues in helping
So
to
I'm
make
so
that happen.
happy to be able to stand here, and you know that I intentionally last year highlighted every single time that we would just crush it in terms of interest earnings, but that's all the work from Rachel. So we did receive the Cash Vest Award from 3+1. They talk about the remarkable speed in which Rachel operated, right? So I had the meeting, I pushed and had the meeting, right? And then Rachel took everything over from an operational standpoint. She's done a wonderful job with that. And you'll see that we've got 1.5 million budgeted. Even though interest rates are going down, we're still in a very strong financial position because she takes an active role of investing that money, and 3+1 partners with us to kind of show us the best way forward. Not just investing our money, but I mean, how many accounts did you don't have to answer, but closed countless accounts, really due diligence in terms of where our money is invested, and she's just done an amazing job with that. And we're in competition with some other districts that have this, and if you look at our actual score, they made a comment that we were the fastest to get there, and it's because Rachel took a very active role in this. So it's a very prestigious award, from the company, and we should all be proud that we're maximizing in these tough fiscal times. Shana mentioned all of the other things that we do with grants and foundations and other revenue sources. This turned into a whole completely separate revenue source because of the work that Rachel has done.
Thank you so much, Rachel. We have just a small certificate of our appreciation for you. Thanks, Rachel. And with that, we have Mr. Clark with the Human Resources Report.
All right, thank you very much. We'll try to get through this efficiently so we can get a little break before the regular board meeting. I'd also like to introduce Orlando Benzan. So happy to have him presenting with me tonight. He's a wonderful thought partner, just a trusted colleague, and couldn't be happier with his work in our department. So our team, I introduced Orlando. We also have Tammy Vanderbilt, who's our Human Resources Assistant, Jill Adams, our Personnel Clerk, and Carol Bomberg, our District Receptionist. We're a great team, like the Incredibles, I would say. A lot of work behind the scenes that people don't see and sometimes appreciate, but they are very, very hard workers and just wonderful colleagues. So our areas of responsibility, so these are the overarching areas that we cover. I would say, depending on the time of year, it's not that one is more important, but certain things will take precedence at certain times of the year. But these are the overarching responsibilities that our department covers. And tonight we're going to highlight just some things like department goals, a bit about our budget, sectioning and staffing. Wanted to share some interesting trends, talk about hiring for a little bit, and then where we are with negotiations. I'll turn this over to Orlando. The first thing we're going to talk about is the electronic onboarding.
One of the things that we have done, we've been working on for the last year or so, is taking our onboarding systems and having them become electronically on, so that we could electronically onboard individuals. What happens now, or what we're working towards, is when we hire someone, we actually, the system can send an email to the individual that says you have been hired and this is the offer sheet, and then the individual can accept the job. And once they accept the job, it auto-populates probably about 70% of the paperwork that traditionally, when they came in, they would have to hand fill in the tax form, all that information, the civil service application, all that information, all the things that had address, phone number, date of birth, Social Security, those things had to be hand done. And the process took about an hour to an hour and a half. what we've been able to do by onboarding people on the electronic platform is we've been able to narrow that down to about half hour to 45 minutes. That actually then gives us the opportunity to have deeper conversations with the individuals so that we can talk about our core values, talk about the mission and vision of our district and of HR, and provide them with the resources and the information so that when they get to their starting job, their location, they have a better understanding of what it is to be an employee of the Pittsford Central School District.
Thank you. I'll talk a little bit more about the branding and recruitment efforts later on. The New York State STEPS planning, so that's our APPR process. We are currently working through the Professional Standards Committee on that work. We just had a meeting this afternoon. We've had a handful of meetings. We have a large group, which is our think tank, and then we have a small group that's our decision-making consortium. And really the look is, how do we want our evaluation process to look so we can support our teachers moving forward? I think the state's done a nice job of taking it off of the accountability piece and solely looking at data and student performance. Not that that's not important, but it's shifted more to how do we support teachers long-term and treat them like professionals, which I think is very appropriate. So our mission statement in the Human Resources Office, again, we did this work last year as we pulled together our members in our department, and we just decided how do we want our mission to look in relation to the district's mission. So where after a lot of work and many meetings, we landed on this mission statement. So we're here to hire and retain exceptional talent that is representative of our diverse school community. We provide comprehensive resources and guidance to meet personal and professional needs that foster a positive and productive workplace, ensuring a supportive environment for all. So you hear some of that language from our core values and our own district's mission statement echoing. One of the many benefits of our building walkthroughs, specifically when we were walking through Thornell Road, and I don't know if you remember the beautiful mural they had in their cafeteria, and I thought, this might be interesting to look at some branding things in the Human Resources Department, just to punch up that level of professionalism and really showcase, because every employee comes to the Human Resources Office, and we really wanted to showcase that level of professionalism. So on the left-hand side, you'll see as you enter, that's where Tammy's desk is. We have that branding. In my area where I have many meetings and where I onboard our professional staff, we have our mission statement there. In Jill's office, we have the Pittsford Schools logo with our three mascots, and then the right-hand side, that's Orlando's office with the I Am Pittsford Schools. It looks really nice. The pictures look nice, but when you see it in person, it just really pops like, wow. It's just something that we thought, because every employee does visit our office, we just wanted it to look very professional and representative of the district. I'll shift a little bit now to our budget history. So this is a 5-year look, and what you'll see here is the proposed budget for this year, which is a 4.8% increase over last year, and I'll break that down a little bit for you. Obviously, within our department, the majority of the budget is in the people that work in the department, and then our next largest areas are contracted services. And that's for things like our Cipher Works. That's where we have our mandatory training for all of our employees. Our Employee Assistance Program, so that's a free service that the district pays for. It's confidential. It's accessible to every employee. They receive information at onboard or when we have private meetings with them. But again, if they have any personal or professional things that they want to talk to a trained professional, they have access to that. And then our mandatory fingerprinting. Many, I wouldn't say many, but there are some districts that cost, it's a little over $100 for fingerprinting. We will reimburse employees after they've worked with us for 5 days. So that's a cost, certainly, when you think about the number of people we hire, what that looks like. So. I'll talk a little bit about elementary sectioning. So this is a trend for our kindergarten through 5th grade. I put a little asterisk by kindergarten because as we're planning for this year, that number is probably the most challenging when you look at our projection numbers and how reliable they are. They're very reliable 1 through 5. Kindergarten is always the wild card because we never know if parents are going to maybe hold kids back, put them in a different program outside of the district. So that's always a moving target for us. We have 113 sections this year. We could, depending on how our final sectioning numbers run, we could expand to 115 for next school year. And when we look at a trend over 5 years, it's kind of what that looks like. So 115 is not far out of the ballpark. We're kind of in the range of where we normally would be. At the middle and high school, middle school is probably the easiest in terms of staffing because they have the team model and things remain very consistent that way. Secondary is always a lot of hard work, and a significant thanks to our secondary principals. They do a lot of work. We meet for full days, multiple times, and we go through every single area, English, math, all the subject areas. We look at what students currently want for programming, and they make such thoughtful decisions, trying to balance that access to programming with being fiscally responsible, and just the expertise at that table. I've learned a lot from them over the years, and they're just so thoughtful and professional, and we appreciate that. So from a hiring standpoint, I just wanted to share a little bit of information. This is a breakdown of the hiring that we've had since July 1st, and I would say we've probably added even since I created the presentation. So when people say, what does HR do? Well, 164 employees just this school year. So it's a lot of information to input into systems, into the retirement system, into our payroll systems, a lot of work on payroll. So this school year, which is certainly a higher number than we've seen in the past year. So compared to last school year, we've hired 73% more teachers, 25% more transportation staff, 73% more food service workers, which makes sense with the free program at the elementary level. Our hiring areas of focus continue to be the science, technology, special education, and Latin. Obviously, support staff are always areas of high need. We'll talk about our recruitment efforts coming up here soon. I wanted to share, I've never shared leaves of absence reports with the board, but I thought, as I was reviewing the data, I thought this was something that was interesting. So when you look at this 5-year trend, so 21-22 school year, that's coming off of COVID, so we had kind of a spike in our overall leaves. So the blue bar represents our child care leaves, the maroon is our FMLA or unpaid leaves, and then the gold is just the consolidation of both of those numbers. So you see, coming off of COVID, we kind of spiked, and then we kind of came down to more of a normal number. But each year, we're seeing an increase in people needing leaves for a variety of reasons. So currently, this school year, we're at 136. So I think we're going to even surpass that 190, probably by a significant number, just based on where our current trends are. So that impacts things like substitutes and programming for students and things like that. So just another challenge. So when people say, what does HR do? The processing of that paperwork, that Family Medical Leave Act paperwork, is significant. A lot of follow-up phone calls and a lot of trying to support staff as they're dealing with those situations.
So far, in order to try to work towards eliminating some of the gaps that we have in terms of positions, in particular when it comes to our clerical, bus drivers, maintenance mechanics, cleaners. We've actually have participated in October, we went to the Eastview Mall and did a job fair at the Eastview Mall. I actually, as a result of that job fair, got in contact with a gentleman that works for the New York State Labor Department, and we've been talking back and forth, and he's actually, the New York State Labor Department now places our help wanted ads on their site and actually forwards our openings to prospective candidates. We've also have created a handshake account to try to hire individuals through other employment platforms beyond the school front, which is what we use. We did a recruitment fair at Roberts, and we are also scheduled to do a recruitment fair at Gates. The one at Gates, Nazareth, and Brockport are all in March. Those are primarily going to be focusing on the teaching staff, but we will also continue to work with the New York State Labor Department to target the bus drivers, the bus attendants, the clericals, and other support services that we need, that we are having a hard time locking those people in.
Thanks, Orlando. I'm on the, one of the leaders on our regional RASPA group for this Regional Teacher Recruitment Day. There have been events in Buffalo, down in Cortland, they have a teacher recruitment event, but we haven't had one in Rochester in a long time. So we just homegrown created this with all area districts participating, and that's going to be a wonderful event for us. So we've put in a lot of time. It's a lot of nights and weekends preparing for and attending those recruitment events. So for contract negotiations, so this year we have bus drivers and attendants, maintenance, custodial, and transportation, and food services. And thank you to Nancy and her department. When we do put out things, I kind of going back a little bit, I forgot to thank Nancy for her department just putting out information for when we are doing recruitment events. They're doing a great job with that. Back to contract negotiation. So this year, you can see the work here that's being done. A significant thank you to Mike Vesby. He's done a lot of work behind the scenes, working with the different units and making sure we have competitive contracts, but also are very fiscally responsible. Next year, forecasting ahead, the big one is PDTA. We are planning for that already, and then we have our office professionals as well. So that's a summary for all things HR. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions? No? Doesn't look like there's any questions. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Orlando. Much appreciated. Thank you. And, thank you, Mike, for your presentation. As always, we appreciate your ability to, really distill down some complicated topics. It's really beneficial to the board and to the public, so thank you. And thank you to Terry and Rachel as well, and everyone else working in the budget process. Thank you. With that, we'll take a few-minute break, and then we will start our regular board meeting.